Hey everybody, second installment in this video series on what does the Bible say about lethal self-protection. And this video I'm going to tell you all about the precedent that the Old Testament sets on if we should, how we should protect ourselves lethally, if it's okay, and all that stuff. And those of us, us Christians who study the Bible, understand that the Old Testament was largely given to us for precedent, not for exact word for word follow everything that was said, but it's a precedent to learn from and to analyze how we should live our lives from. That's not the only thing it's good for, but if you read Paul's writings, he says it was a school. The Old Testament was a school teacher, so we could learn from it on how to live moral lives and all that stuff. So we're going to see the story of Nehemiah from the Old Testament and the story of Esther from the Old Testament. So let's get started. Nehemiah chapter 4, verse 18. If you want to flip through your Bible or your Bible app to find there, I'll talk a little bit and give you the context of Nehemiah. Nehemiah was a servant of the king of Assyria who, when Israel was in captivity, or Jerusalem was in captivity, and he saw that the capital of Jerusalem did not have a wall around it. People could just come through, steal what they wanted to, or just come through, kill as many citizens as they wanted to, and run out. There wasn't any wall to protect the city. Didn't settle well with Nehemiah. He eventually voiced his concern to the king of Assyria. When the king of Assyria asked him what was wrong, king of Assyria gave him his blessing to go and actually build a wall there. And Nehemiah built the wall an entire wall around the city in 3 months. Unheard of. But they had experienced some persecution, and there's actually the threat of people actually trying to kill the Israelites who were trying to build a wall there. So they had to take drastic measures. And Nehemiah 4 verse 18, Nehemiah wrote the book Nehemiah in first person. So he says here, for the builders, every one of them had a sword girded by his side, and so builded. And he that sounded the trumpet was by me. So they were ready at every moment to strike. They had their swords on their side, and they were ready to go if the attack happened. That was how imminent it was. Every one of them had their sword on them the entire time. And the biblicalselfdefense.com has a really good analysis on this part right here, and I'll summarize for you. Go read that article. I'm going to link to it in the description box below. But description box. How long has it been since people called it a description box? Anyways, so basically, like the threat. There's an imminent threat here. They could be killed at any moment, and so they kept their weapons on their side, their sword on their side. Now it's interesting here that that what they carried on them. They didn't carry daggers. They didn't carry shanks. They didn't carry javelins, which is basically just a really long pointy stick that's meant to throw. They had swords on their sides. Why is that important? Because at that time, swords were the weapon of war in that period. Like those swords would be our equivalent to military assault weapons. Whether you want to refer to it as in our country, we think of it as the M4, M16, whatever variant the military uses, or say a squad automatic weapon, the SAW. You go on and on. It's a weapon. There was a weapon of war at that time, much like muskets and Kentucky long rifles were the weapons of war in the time of our founding fathers. But these people, the threat was so imminent in the story of Nehemiah that they stayed strapped. We would say how we would say today. The threat was so imminent they carried on them all the time. I believe that sets a precedent for us now that it's perfectly fine to stay strapped. The Old Testament is perfectly fine with people keeping weapons of war on them. Now, how far you take that, what if you want to carry on you, what you want to carry on you, I'll leave that up to you. I'm just saying here that based on the precedent set here in Nehemiah, it's perfectly fine to stay strapped. And again, the biblicalselfdefense.com gives a really good analysis on the subject as well. All right, so also, we'll skip to the story of Esther, and there's a subject that ties two of these together somewhat, and I'll get to that in a minute. Esther chapter 8 through 9. Let's see. I'm just gonna read one verse from here. Go to Esther chapter 8. Story of Esther is fairly simple. The king Ahasuerus, I believe his name was. It's actually I forget what Ahasuerus is here. What the Bible uses. I believe I forget what secular history remembers Ahasuerus as, but he was the king who fought in the Greco-Persian War. Interesting note. Basically, the king of Persia got tired of his wife, or she displeased him. So to make a point, he divorced her, and he was looking for another wife. Had some kind of, I'm thinking of the VeggieTales story in my head. He chose Esther as his wife. Didn't know she was a Hebrew. She was an Israelite and all this stuff. And Haman hated the Israelites. Haman, one of the high up servants of the king of Persia, wanted all the Jews to die just because one guy did something he didn't like. So Haman tricked the king of Persia into signing a law saying at this date the military is going to come through and commit genocide against all the Israelites because we don't want Jews in our land anymore because one Jewish guy did something I didn't like. And the law was written in a way where it could not be reversed. And so Esther eventually told the king about it. Told the king that she was also a Jew, an Israelite, and that if this was to be order was to be carried out, she would die as well. The king got furious with Haman. Something else happened, made him even more furious with Haman. Haman died, and right here they kind of fix the issue in the story. Esther chapter 8 verse 11 says, "Wherein the king granted the Jews which were in every city to gather themselves together and to stand for their life, to destroy, to slay, to cause to perish all the power of the people and province that would assault them, both little ones and women, and to take the spoil of the prey." So the king of Persia writes another law that cannot be reversed, saying, okay, on this day, the nation, every Jew, every Israelite can gather. They can form a militia, come together, and keep their families safe from genocide, which I kind of wrote into law, and so story goes on. What can we learn from this? I honestly think that this precedent shows us that we can assemble ourselves together to keep our families to keep the ones we care about safe. But like I said, this is pretty much a militia. The king of Persia said, all right, Israelites, it's all right for you to form a militia to keep yourselves safe from this genocide. And it's arguable whether or not he actually commanded his soldiers to go out and do such a thing. But this precedent shows us that if there is a threat to us, it is perfectly fine and acceptable to form a militia to keep our families safe, keep our society safe from external threats. Say the cartels come, Russians invade, whatever you want to, whatever, the zombie apocalypse, whatever instance you throw out. In the case of evil, it is perfectly acceptable for those of us to protect ourselves, form a militia to protect ourselves and our society. Historical proof to this point: back in the civil rights movement, one atrocity of the time was Martin Luther King Jr. himself was denied a concealed carry permit by the state of Georgia, assumably because he was black. I don't know any other reason why, but he was denied a concealed carry permit, which is why shall issue is better than may issue. Constitutional carry is ideal, but I gotta stay focused. So this, in that point, in that point in time, to the African American community formed what was known as the Deacons of Defense. And what the Deacons of Defense were, they were armed. These men armed themselves for when, like, say, the Klan decided to come through and tried to do a lynching. The Deacons of Defense would would all arm themselves up and go keep that person safe from being lynched by the villainous crew that would try to do that. And time and time again, the deacons of defense rose up to keep, say, try to keep Martin Luther King Jr. safe, or try to prevent a lynching, all this kind of stuff. Look up the deacons of defense. Kevin Blanchard did a really good series on this on his podcast. Go try to look it up. He has studied the subject out fully, but that is a somewhat current instance in our American history of what these passages are talking about in Esther and in Nehemiah, because there was racial prejudice that was fueling this attempted genocide in both cases. And since they were under a threat from not a military, well, in one case military, but like it was more so of a civil rights issue, a racist issue. Like people just hated them just because they were them and wanted them to die because they were them. Then the Jewish people armed themselves and prepared to protect their family, their society, their way of life. And I see from these passages that it is completely moral and completely Christian thing to do to arm yourselves and to form a militia, if you want to use that term, to keep your family and your society, your way of life safe from anybody who wants to destroy it. And that might be taking it a little extreme. I don't think so. The precedent that's set here in both these stories somewhat support people owning weapons of war for the purpose of preventing genocide, keeping their family, their society, their way of life safe. And if you agree with me or disagree with me, put it down in the topic below. Put it down in the comments below. And again, try to keep it biblical. If you want to use logical or political arguments, historical arguments, that's fine. I'm trying to keep my what I speak on biblical. So I would appreciate if your responses were to stay biblical, but if not, I still like observing everybody's thoughts to have a well-rounded opinion. Put your thoughts in the description box below, like I've said about 3 times now, because redundancy is fun repeating yourself. And I'll remind you all to like, share, comment, all that stuff, and walk Christian walk and carry loaded Glock.